1989 was an interesting year for horror cinema. While films such as Beetlejuice and Pet Sematary filled theater seats, smaller movies were thriving in the home video market. Companies like Vestron were releasing titles such as Parents and C.H.U.D 2 Bud the Chud, while studios like Troma were churning out multiple Toxic Avenger sequels. 2 in 1 year, in fact.
Can't you please help the homeless? Can't you please lend us a buck?
Neither a borrower nor a lender be. Shakespeare.
You, David Mamet.
From a top-down view, I find the year to be very strong for the genre overall, especially when it comes to cult classics hailing from every corner of the planet. Of course, there's Brian Yuzna's beautifully disgusting Society, Shinya Tsukamoto's technophobic nightmare Tetsuo the Iron Man, then there's Don't Panic, Ruben Galindo Jr.'s wonderfully kooky Nightmare on Elm Street knockoff. The Fly 2 managed to bring the blood, if not the brains, in the unfairly maligned sequel to Cronenberg's masterpiece. And in the realm of the underrated and underseen, we have my favorite Friday the 13th, Part 8, and the appropriately unexpected wackiness of Spontaneous Combustion, directed by Tobe Hooper of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre fame. I even love some of the almost inarguably bad movies of 1989. Things, a film that has been widely recognized among cult film fans as one of the worst movies ever made, will always occupy a warm place in my heart. But somewhere between the good and the unwatchable are the middle-of-the-road projects that more or less achieved their vision and found success on VHS and Laserdisc. Enough success to justify a video game adaptation. Movies like this one. Let's take a look.
The project began one day out of my pool. I'm thinking like trying to come up with a good story that'll just make me a lot of bucks. But then I came up with a few things, but I said no. I want to explore the area of witchcraft because it's so wide open for dramatic purposes. There's just a lot of grist for the creative mill.
And with that, the mill was turning. Writer David Twohy wrestled with how his story would form around the idea of witchcraft. He initially created the central character of a sympathetic male witch, or warlock, who travels through time from colonial America to modern-day Los Angeles and faces much of the same persecution in the present as he did in the past. Over the course of about 8 weeks of work, however, the warlock became the movie's villain, the son of Satan, who is on a quest to undo God's creation. Twohy soon delivered 14 pages of his unfinished screenplay to producer Arnold KOPELSON.
I had him give me an outline of the balance of the screenplay as he saw it, as it would be if he had finished it. And I asked him to write more because his writing talent was so exciting.
Twohy got back to work while KOPELSON went off to produce another movie, but you've probably never heard of it.
And the winner is Platoon.
After finding the perfect spot for his little gold statue, KOPELSON was off to find the perfect director for the Warlock picture. He met with Steve Miner, who had made the Wonder Years pilot and the financially successful, if woefully misguided, Soul Man. The filmmaker also had horror chops as the director of House from 1986 and 2 Friday the 13th sequels. Unfortunately, KOPELSON and Miner's relationship got off to a rocky start.
Our first meeting was a disaster. The two of us met with 3 other people, and Steve very quickly told me that he didn't really like the screenplay and wanted to make some changes. And it was very interesting because about 6 months later, I again looked at the films he had directed, and I said, this is the man that I really want to make this film. And we got together, just the 2 of us alone, and we had a terrific rapport.
Miner had already been thinking about 2 actors who could play the titular baddie. Julian Sands was a working English actor who had made a name for himself by the mid-80s with memorable performances in The Killing Fields and A Room with a View, but before that received classical training from the Central School of Speech and Drama in London.
If King Edward proves as true and just as I am false and treacherous, this day should Clarence closely be mewed up. Soft. Here Clarence comes.
Also up for consideration was Richard E. Grant, who had turned heads a little more recently with a marvelous and darkly comedic turn in Withnail and I. The role ultimately went to Sands, who was intentionally cast against type, as he was then known mostly as a dramatic and romantic actor.
one of the reasons I wanted to be an actor was to do different things. And I was doing a film in Poland before the end of last year, which was the most sort of substantial and dramatic thing I'd ever been involved with, and to do something which was so purely an entertainment, and where the production values were all orientated around that was refreshing.
So, with Sands locked in, as well as model, actress, and concert cellist Laurie Singer as the leading lady, Miner was determined to find his hero, a grizzled witch hunter in pursuit of the devil's progeny. He didn't have just anyone in mind, though.
And I said, we can't hire some, good American actor and make him talk in a British accent, and I really think the way to go is send me to London. Let's just see every good actor we can see in London for 3 or 4 days. And they agreed. And Richard Grant came in. And I said, yeah, let's see him, even though I originally said, well, he's probably more a Warlock. And he came through the door, and it was Redfern.
With primary roles cast, the production was set to begin. Principal photography took the crew from coast to coast with key scenes in Los Angeles, the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, and the famous Plymouth Plantation in Massachusetts, which itself landed the producers in some lukewarm water.
I don't think Arnold was totally upfront with Plymouth Plantation about what the movie was about, because once we finished filming, there was all hell to pay because they were freaking out that we made a horror movie there, that they're using this very important historical reenactment village to sell a horror movie. So there was some fallout on that, and I don't think anybody's been allowed to film there since.
With such strong performers as Sands and Grant in the leads, a director's job must be considerably easier, and Miner had no problem taking a hands-off approach to his work. In talking actors through scenes, he refused to give specific line readings to mimic or demonstrate physical actions, leading to what Miner felt was more freedom for and creativity from his performers.
Julian tried to trap me in the subway station, asked me to demonstrate how I would do his magic trick, but I didn't fall for it. You walk across them, let this sort of stop you, and then back up, do your thing. And then as you walk forward, they'll pull on it, and all of them are going to turn.
You want to walk through for me, see?
No way.
To show you how you would do it?
No way. I wouldn't know how. That's why I'm back there.
The shoot went smoothly, with all key participants reportedly having had a good experience on set. Except for Laurie Singer, that is. The old age makeup required for the part had Singer in a chair for hours each morning, only to emerge from the trailer with uncomfortable latex prosthetics all over her face that she had to wear for the entire workday.
Disastrous. The process of aging Laurie Singer throughout the film was indeed disastrous. She agreed to wear the wig or the various different wigs, the appliances for the hands, and maybe a couple of eye bags and a forehead, but that just doesn't cut it. And I don't think when she agreed to do the film, she had a real understanding of what it would take.
Carl Fullerton and Neil Martz were not only responsible for the practical effects that didn't appear in the film, but also the ones that did. And with a musical score by the then 10-time Oscar-nominated composer Jerry Goldsmith, Warlock hit theaters nationwide. Actually, no, it didn't.
The ad campaign, I thought that New World had put together for the movie looked good. And I know there was a lot of interest in people going to see the movie, and then the company basically got sold, went bankrupt, sold off its assets, and they just didn't get distribution. I know that a lot of people were excited to see it in the theater because the trailers came out, and the trailers were good, I remember, and had a lot of people's interest, and then it just never showed up in the theaters.
The story doesn't end there, however, as it's VHS to the rescue. Although the movie wrapped in 1988 and saw theatrical releases outside the United States in '89, the folding of New World Pictures forced the completed film into limbo for 2 years until distributor Vidmark licensed the project for a home video release.
And somehow they made a deal with, I forget the name of the company now, that released the VHS at the time, of Warlock, and it was very successful.
And thanks to the recently resurrected home video company Vestron, Americans can now see the film in its original theatrical aspect ratio for the first time, all in glorious high definition. But allow me, if you will, to take you back to before the age of Blu-ray and 4K. It's 1991. You walk through the glass door and into the warm fluorescence of your local mom-and-pop video shop. Baptized in the aroma of popcorn and plastic and stale cigarettes, you move over thinly carpeted floors, past rows upon rows upon rows of tape covers, each begging you to take it home. Arriving in a dark corner, far from the safety of those chunky, colorful clamshells full of talking mice and flying elephants, where the dream of movie magic becomes a nightmare of creative chaos, surrounded by the grim faces of madmen and monsters, a white box catches your eye. A handsome man, sharply dressed, casts a demonic shadow. His baleful glare entraps you, and the deal is done. A deal with the devil. You can already hear the familiar pop of the rental case opening, the mechanical whir of the magnetic strip winding through the belly of a Panasonic OmniVision PV4104. And now, your feature presentation. Boston, 1691. A warlock has been captured by witch hunter Giles Redfern and sentenced to death for the murder of Redfern's family. Before he can be executed, however, Satan opens a portal through which his son can escape. The warlock disappears into the miasma, followed by the witch hunter. The warlock lands in 1980s Los Angeles and is taken in by a diabetic waitress named Cassandra, played by Laurie Singer. While Cassandra is out, the evil sorcerer murders Cassandra's roommate and leaves. The young woman learns of her roommate's death and returns to her home, a newly christened crime scene. There she meets Redfern, who has tracked the warlock to the apartment. Using a drop of the witch's blood, the warrior calibrates a device that will help him find the son of Satan wherever he goes. Suspicious of the unkempt Redfern, Cassandra has him arrested. Meanwhile, the warlock visits a psychic played by B-movie stalwart Mary Warrenoff. The channeler becomes possessed by Satan, who instructs his son to collect the pieces of the Grand Grimoire, an unholy tome that can unmake God's creation, bringing an end to the universe and everything in it. Using the medium's disembodied eyeballs as a compass, the warlock tracks down the first piece of the book, which just so happens to be hidden in an antique table back in Cassandra's flat. There he encounters the waitress before absconding with part of the Grand Grimoire as well as Cassandra's bracelet, a token with which he curses her to age 20 years each day.
Tout, tout, through and about your callow life in dismay. Rentum osculum tormentum. A decade twice over a day.
Waking up to face a considerably older woman in the mirror, Cassandra bails Redfern out of jail to help find the warlock, break her curse, and stop him from destroying the world. What follows is a cross-country game of cat and mouse that leads the pursuing duo to a confrontation with their enemy at the home of a Mennonite family. Before he escapes with the second piece of the book, Cassandra is able to reclaim her bracelet, breaking the aging curse, but their quest isn't over yet. The final act of the film takes the trio to Boston, where the last chunk of the Grand Grimoire is safely buried in Redfern's grave. However, construction has temporarily forced many of the coffins in the cemetery to unconsecrated grounds where the warlock can tread. Cassandra and Redfern dig up the remaining piece of the book just as their villain arrives. The witch hunter does battle with his foe, but is eventually overcome. As the warlock begins the world-ending ritual with the completed tome, Cassandra appears and uses one of her insulin needles to inject salt water from the bay into the demon's neck. The warlock writhes in pain as he bursts into flames and crumbles into a charred skeleton. Redfern crushes the blackened skull underfoot, ending the witch's reign of terror. Warlock is a fun romp that suffers from a little too much downtime between set pieces. The road trip gumshoe aspects of the movie fatten up a story that could benefit from losing about 15 minutes of middling character development and exposition. However, some of these scenes reveal the depth of research that David Twohy did to realize his vision. There are lots of little nods to various superstitions and myths about witchcraft that make the depiction of the practice feel very authentic.
If you couple a witch's thumbs to his toes, then his magic has nowhere to go. Magic cycles in back on itself. And then he is virtually helpless. So as long as the warlock is restrained by these, he has no magical powers. But once he's free of these, watch out.
Where the movie really shines is when Fullerton and Mertz's work is on display. Reverse shots, bladder gags, and intricately detailed puppets and models imbue the film with the grounded and tactile grotesquerie that only well-done practical effects can. The optical effects by perpetual motion leave a little to be desired, but the frame-by-frame process by which they animated the Warlock spells is still a testament to their tenacity and craft. Unfortunately, the albatross around the movie's neck is Laurie Singer, whose unconvincing makeup job only compounds the core issue that she simply feels miscast. And yes, the movie does feel a bit like a Terminator retread. A time-traveling hero follows his nemesis to the modern day, where he teams up with a young woman. But despite the similarity, Warlock manages to bring something enjoyable and entertaining to the formula.
At the time, I thought, if there's a sequel to this, perhaps Laurie and Richard and I we'll develop this sort of triangular dynamic. Well, as you know, there were sequels, but they weren't involved.
That's right, Julian. The success of Warlock on home video convinced Vidmark to produce their own sequel. Tapping Anthony HICKOX, the English director of both WAXWORK films and Hellraiser 3, the production decided to make a Warlock follow-up that was wholly unrelated to the original, with the exception of Julian Sands returning to the eponymous role, something we might today call a soft reboot.
Basically, it's about this demon, the Warlock, who comes to Earth to collect these 6 runestones that will basically release hell on Earth.
And these runestones have been separated and scattered, and some are held by fiercely vigilant druids, others are casually worn, as in the case of this fashion show, where one is a pendant around one of these beauteous necks. And the Warlock's aim is to gather them all up.
Along for the ride this time are minor Tiger Beat heartthrob Chris Young and Paula Marshall, whom HICKOX had worked with on Hellraiser 3 the prior year. The two play the descendants of ancient druids who were tasked with preventing the coming apocalypse and keeping Satan within the earth. Their character arcs see the reawakening of their dormant witch-hunting powers alongside their blossoming romance. Oh, hi, Zach Galligan.
Who the hell are you? Black.
Bye, Zach Galligan.
It's a very simple story in that sense, but it's a very complicated script, which is why I wanted to do it.
And it's that simplicity of plot and complexity of set pieces that ultimately win the day. Whereas the original film put long scenes of low-impact story development between moments of kinetic and phantasmagorical intrigue, the sequel takes a more propulsive approach. Pound for pound, Warlock the Armageddon boasts far more visual effects and action sequences than its predecessor. The nature of the plot takes Sands' character to new and interesting places in search of each of the runes. A fashion show, a museum, a circus sideshow, a dusty little town where an Old West standoff takes place. Even the driving scenes are more interesting.
Oh, this mirror is just so small, I can't see my hair. Oh, it must look awful, doesn't it? It does. It looks dreadful, doesn't it? I know it does. It looks awful. You would tell me the truth, wouldn't you? How does it look?
Here, see yourself.
While optical effects are wisely limited, there is a bit of early CGI here that is interesting, if not entirely seamless. Yeah, this arrived in theaters a few months after Jurassic Park, but an Amblin budget this did not have. While the effects overall took a step up, so did other aspects of production. Like Paula Marshall, cinematographer Jerry Lively followed HICKOX from the second Hellraiser sequel to this project, employing stark, colorful lighting and ample use of split-field diopters. The result is a profoundly stylish film. While no one actor fully fills Richard E. Grant's shoes, the group of old druid dads prove a charming replacement. The teenage protagonists do their jobs well enough, but their natural chemistry goes a long way in selling their on-screen affair. And finally, not enough can be said about Julian Sands, the MVP and inimitable anchor of both of these films. Sands is the Warlock. Others need not apply. Well, except for Bruce Payne, I guess.
They did approach me to play Warlock in Warlock 3, but the script was, I thought, feeble, and the production approach lacked any imagination or ambition.
Well said, Julian. We're old friends, you know. The less said about 1999's Warlock 3, the better. Despite a couple of creative gags and one admittedly excellent throat rip, the bottle thriller premise of a group of beautiful young people trapped in a house with the Warlock just didn't jive with what critics or audiences expected from the series. The photography is flat, the music is terrible, and the clothes are very, very baggy. Bruce Payne is okay in it though. Rewinding a few years to the mid-90s, video game developer and publisher Real Time Associates was busy cranking out licensed games for everything from Beavis and Butthead to the Berenstain Bears. So when the opportunity to work on the Warlock game came along, this group of ex-Mattel employees led by David Warhol didn't pass it up. And on May 26, 1995, with the ominous super title Beware the Ultimate Evil of, Warlock was released by LJN for Super Nintendo and Acclaim for Sega Genesis. Today, we'll be looking at the SNES version. As did many games of the era, the project took shape as a side-scrolling actioner, putting the player in the rustic shoes of a druid warrior with a distinctly Redfern-esque power mullet. The amalgamation of elements from the first two films ends there, however. The story is more of a loose retelling of Warlock the Armageddon. The eye catch that appears after a few seconds on the title screen reads,
"Once every millennium, when the sun aligns with the moon, druid guardians summon the magic of their sacred runestones to prevent the rebirth of the ancient Warlock. The 6 sacred stones are scattered through time and across the continents. Using powers inherited from your druid ancestors, you must find all 6 before the Warlock. This is the most desperate hour. Find the stones and destroy the Warlock, or we shall forever live in darkness."
Bequeathed to the Druid Warrior is a floating orb that he will use to defeat enemies and pick up hard-to-reach items. Items such as weak and strong smart bombs that can clear the screen of threats. Support spells are gained for healing, revival, and protection against enemies, while the Tremor Staff is useful for shaking loose elements of the local geography to access new areas. And finally, the Time Reversal Sundial, which effectively acts as a checkpoint to which you'll return if cast, or where you'll respawn if you have a revival spell in your inventory. Also among the player's arsenal is a Magic Blast, which acts as your basic projectile attack. With these tools at his disposal, the warrior chases the Warlock through 6 levels filled with ghastly ghouls and demons. From a New England town, through caves and gardens, into a wizard's castle and past a dark cemetery, over a distant mountain range, all before finally arriving in the dark realm of the devil for the hero's final confrontation with the Warlock. With the theme and playstyle of Warlock, it's hard not to make comparisons to classic Castlevania games. It's similarly slow-moving and deliberate. Enemies appear at the same locations in an attempt to make encounters memorizable, and in that way function almost like action puzzles with predictable elements, including not only an enemy's expected location, but behavior patterns as well. Unfortunately, the whole thing is a series of half measures. What feels precisely composed in early Castlevania games comes off as clumsy and sluggish in Warlock. The Magic Blast is weak and unversatile, while the orb is too unpredictable to be useful in the frantic heat of combat. The 2 smart bombs are the only offensive sub-items, and they're just global damage dealers without any finesse of use required whatsoever. That said, they do come in handy in a pickle. Level design is often flat and linear, with the druid simply moving from left to right most of the time. Some levels employ simple vertical mazes and environmental puzzles, but when I say puzzle, sometimes it's just flipping the same switch a few times until the thing happens. The player is kept interested in all areas of the screen with items, enemies, and switches only reachable by the orb ability, but the game's verticality is otherwise unremarkable. There are some secret areas sprinkled in, though. Using the Tremor Staff is suitably satisfying, opening a path or dropping a levitation crystal to give your jump a boost into a previously inaccessible alcove. While the variety of enemy types isn't lacking necessarily, the absence of interesting boss fights is apparent, although there are a few event battles that wouldn't even qualify as mini-bosses in my eyes. You face the Warlock 3 times across the 6 main stages before the final battle, each time collecting one of the 6 runes. The other 3 stones you just find laying about while making your way through the game. Only once before his ultimate transformation does the Warlock face you as anything other than the blonde, beponytailed 16-bit effigy of Julian Sands, and the ensuing boss battle is unimpressive. I do find this game very visually pleasing. The sprite animation is smooth and evocative, although the human character's size undermines the fact that they were rotoscoped, painstakingly animated frame by frame over live action footage of real actors shot on location in El Segundo, California. Compare the sprite detail in something like Mortal Kombat, and you can easily see why, in this instance, size certainly matters. The creature designs are fun, and there's a good eye for lighting on display in the environmental elements. While a very different game in many respects, the color design reminds me of Eric Shahi's Another World for the Amiga and Atari ST, bringing a broad spectrum of pastel hues to the dark liminal spaces depicted in the game. The heads-up display is bulky, but features a fun callback to Doom with a deteriorating portrait of the player character that also serves as the life bar. And the graphical treat of all treats, the Game Over screen features the pixelized visage of the Warlock himself, Julian Sands, mocking your defeat. Sorry, Bruce Payne. I also enjoy the soundtrack by Eric Swanson. The heavy use of organ keeps the mood nice and spooky, while crunchy, prominent bass lines serve as yet another welcome inspiration from Doom. By the end of the game, the music gets a little samey, but I was nodding my head to it throughout. Difficulty-wise, it's tough, but not impossible. The password save system is reasonably generous, giving the player a checkpoint after each level, and the sundial item functions well enough as a mid-level bookmark. Overall, Warlock for Super Nintendo didn't impress me enough to recommend it. Other than some minor graphical changes, the Genesis version is virtually identical, so I can't in good conscience tell you to look there for a better experience either. The only people this game will likely appeal to on any level are Warlock fans, and there are dozens of us. With a decent original film and a not quite decent video game adaptation, I can see how one could reserve excitement for exploring the Warlock franchise. But if I can impart one thing to you, it's that Warlock the Armageddon rules. I'm giving you permission to skip the first movie if you want to, but only if you promise never to watch the terminally boring Warlock 3.
Sure will be anything but boring.
Thanks, Bruce.